combining multiple strategies. Let's say you live in this property, you add a couple of units, and then let's say you Airbnb one or two of these units. That's three strategies. That's development / value add because you just added units, your house hacking because you're living in one of the units, and then you're Airbnb one of the units to maximize your income. So getting creative like this and combining strategies in today's day and age, that's how you're going to accelerate your wealth building.
Welcome to the podcast, Real Estate Investing with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You could also call me Coach, and this is a show to help you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, thank you for being back for another episode. Now, I probably don't have to tell you, but finding real estate investment deals that actually produce a positive cash flow can be really challenging, especially if you're in a higher cost of living area, most of California, New York, bigger cities. It can be extremely difficult. So what I've learned over the years is that investors who are successful at doing deals consistently when a lot of other people think it can't be done, they find little techniques. They find ways of doing deals maybe that are either hidden or there's some kind of barrier to entry, some knowledge you have to learn. And that's really what this episode's about. It is a particular technique called using an accessory dwelling unit, also known as an A.D.U. And we're going to explain what that means with an interview with someone named Shawn. And he lives in San Diego, California, one of the most expensive markets in the country. And we're going to talk about a strategy he's been using to add accessory dwelling units, either building a new building behind an existing single-family house or multi-unit property, or in some cases in San Diego where there's a special program, building multiple units. But no matter where you are in the country, we're going to talk about what this strategy is, how you might be able to add it to existing rental properties that you have potentially, and then also learning how to evaluate properties that maybe don't look like deals in your market yet, but by learning this type of thing, you might be able to find hidden gems that could produce cash flow and become a really good investment for you. So without further delay, let's get to my interview with Shawn. Hey, Shawn, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me on, Coach Carson. I've been looking forward to this, man. I've followed you for a long time. I read your first book years ago, and it's really kind of an honor to be on here.
Well, thank you. Likewise. And I had the honor of being on your podcast as well, and you're doing some great work. And I want to dig into a subject, and I told you before we got on that I want to be like the student here. You've done a lot of cool things. You've got multi-unit properties, you've got Airbnbs, but in particular, one thing I want to dig into and become the student on today is understanding this world of accessory dwelling units, A.D.Us, how to do it, what the opportunity is, and really from the perspective of small and mighty investors, a lot of people who are listening to this, like having another tool in their tool belt to make money on properties, especially in high cost of living areas that they might not think of. So I want to dig into all that, Shawn, but it's always fun to also know your background. And so maybe could we go back to your career? You were a air traffic controller, and you got this bug to get into real estate. So I'd love just to kind of start there and maybe go forward to how your journey began as a real estate investor.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to tell the story. So I'll do a really quick version too of where it all started. I mean, basically I was going to college, University of Louisville, changed my major twice, couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Met this guy that was an air traffic controller. He took me up into the tower in Louisville, and everybody in the tower was either ex-Air Force or ex-Navy. And they said, it's a great job, pays well. They always need controllers. If you do it for the military, you're a shoo-in. So I said, all right. Switched in. Next thing you knew, I was joining the Navy as an air traffic controller. I flew out to San Diego after basic training and did it here for 5 years. Got out, got hired by the FAA. So the plan worked. It was my dream job. It really was. Like I grew up poor in Kentucky. So like when I started making over six figures, I thought I was made. Like I was like, man, this is amazing. I could do whatever I want. I don't have to worry about turning the lights off in the house and stuff and pinching pennies on food. So I started making good money in air traffic control. But at the same time, like air traffic control obviously is really stressful and you work a lot. Like you'll read about this on the news all the time. Air traffic control is short on staff. And the thing about air traffic control is like when you sign up, you sign documents that you are required to work overtime if they assign it. It's mandatory, which makes sense, obviously, if they need staff and people just don't show up to work, then the entire national airspace system doesn't work. So the thing is, my days off were Tuesday, Wednesday. Most of the time I would work overtime on Wednesday. So I only had Tuesdays off most of the year, which is crazy. And then my weekends, I would work Friday night, then Saturday morning. So I couldn't go out and do anything Friday night. Saturday, I could hang out if I wanted to, but I had to be back at work at 5:30 in the morning on Sunday. Then Sunday night, I get off work 1:30 p.m. Sunday, go back to work Sunday night at 10 p.m. and work the graveyard shift until 6 a.m. Monday morning. I did that every week. And I was just realizing like, man, like this is great money, but I mean, this isn't the life I want to live until retirement. It would have been, I literally would not have been qualified for weekends until I was in my 50s. So to have weekends off, I mean. So, I'm grinding, starting to rethink like what I want in life. And I remember sitting down with a buddy who was a real estate agent, having coffee. I was telling him, man, I want to invest or something so I can retire earlier. I was starting to get into the FIRE movement, right? Financial independence, retire early. And this guy said to me, this is years ago, he said, dude, you should check out this podcast called Bigger Pockets. It's about real estate investing. I think you should invest in real estate. And one day I was driving up to Yosemite National Park for a backpacking trip. I had 6.5 hours to kill. And I put that podcast on and the rest is history. I mean, I was just hearing stories of school teachers, being able to retire early and building these big portfolios, single moms or people that have 4 or 5 kids. And I started thinking to myself like, okay, if they could do that with those salaries, I have absolutely no excuse right now not to figure this out. And that really just started the rabbit hole, man. I started reading every time a book was mentioned on Bigger Pockets, I bought it. I mean, you name it, I've read it. I just became a student and was just obsessed. And so I guess that was really the catalyst. And then from there, as I was reading, I obviously started learning about multifamily and how that was a little more scalable and how successful people were. And flash forward to I'm looking for multifamily properties with a couple guys I'm in air traffic control with. Couldn't find stuff that works. And we just decided, let's just combine our money and actually get a bigger multifamily. So my first ever investment was a 32 unit multifamily property. But amazing. Yeah, that's the gist of it, man.
Yeah, I love it. Well, so many things that are cool, just personally, I resonate with. Just the motivation to get out of the grind. Like that's the tagline of this show is, get out of the financial grind, do more of what matters. Like that seems to encapsulate exactly that. Since it's not a bad job, it's a great job, but being beholden to the schedule and not having control of your time, such a big deal.
And doing more of what I want to do. Like I would have to bid for my vacation days in October usually. We would bid for all your vacation days next year. So if I wanted to take a vacation next year, I have to have all of those vacation days figured out and then bid based off seniority, which is tough to do. Like if you want to go on a backpacking trip with friends and you're like, hey man, it's October, but let's plan for this trip in August of next year. Everyone's like, dude, I'll try, but that's like super far away. So it just, for me to do more backpacking and things that I wanted to do, it was so hard. Like, I'm trying to pick out these days ahead of time and it was almost impossible.
Yeah. The backpacking is the other thing I resonate with you. And I had the similar story, but I was flipping houses. That was kind of my grind. And I had a moment in 2007 where my business partner and I made a list of things that really we wanted to do with our time, each of us. And mine was, I want to be able to backpack in the middle of the day. Like I live near the Appalachian Mountains, waterfalls. So like, I get that. It's like the flexibility to be able to do that kind of stuff is why I got into this. And I try to describe it once, now you're fast forward, you're out of the grind. Like you've bought these properties, you went into the multi-unit world, which is a whole nother episode we could talk about because it's really cool as well. But one of the things you started doing, I understand, and maybe you could tell me how you got into this, was also house hacking, was also doing Airbnb. So maybe talk about that kind of part of your real estate journey, because you had the multifamily with your partners. That's, scaling that and getting that going was one piece, but you had this other kind of parallel piece where you're doing some of this other stuff on your own as well.
Yeah. So I quickly realized, that if I wanted to quit my job, I needed to replace that income, or at least a good chunk of it. So I needed cash flow. And in my opinion, the easiest way and the most powerful way to increase your cash flow exponentially are 2 things. It's house hacking and Airbnb. Airbnb, just simply because it's more income, right? Like you're going to make 5-10 times more in gross rental revenue from short-term rentals than you would from long-term rentals. So I'm able to have thousands of dollars in cash flow from just a couple Airbnbs. That to this day, that's what I live off of for the most part. And then, the house hacking, it's simple, man. Like, your living expenses are the most expensive. Like where you live is the most expensive expense that pretty much everybody has. Well, just simply even getting a duplex, which is what I did. If you live in one side and Airbnb out the other, in most markets, I mean, if I can make it work in San Diego, which has some of the most expensive housing prices, then I'm pretty sure you can make it work literally anywhere in the United States. But if you're living in one half and Airbnb in the other half, and you get like $10,000 in gross revenue from one half per month, that's going to cover all of your bills. So you're living for free, basically, which now exponentially increases your cash flow. So those two strategies, I mean, that's really the rocket fuel that allowed me to take off so that I can focus on growing the portfolio and get out of my job.
Yeah, love it. And kind of the way my strategy, as I understand it, you have kind of one part of your business is building some pretty big wealth, and you have some big paydays down the road, which for a lot of people can be like your long-term equity play, whatever that
Exactly.
is, like long-term single-family rentals, your multifamily. But then you got these cash flow, and I love that balance. You have both of those, and that might be a good jumping off point. House hacking is is a strategy that most people have heard about. And if you haven't, I've got some good episodes that I'll put links to in the show notes. But I want to use that as a jumping off point, because when people start looking for house hacking, they typically look for like a duplex or triplex or fourplex. That's kind of your traditional house hack. But the reality is, in San Diego and lots of markets across the country, single family houses are the primary housing stock of most communities. And so some people look at it and they're like, well, look at all these houses. Like, how am I supposed to house hack? I can either rent out extra bedrooms, which I don't really want to do, or I don't have another option. So that brings us to this idea of accessory dwelling units, A.D.Us. And I want to get into the opportunity first, but can you just explain just kind of 101 version of what an A.D.U is and maybe how that came about?
So I'm going to start with how they came about. So in the state of California, especially, and now a lot of other cities are doing this, cities that are facing the problem of growing populations and a really bad housing crisis with, rising prices, a lot of these cities don't have more room to build new housing. San Diego is a great example. Is geographically constrained by the ocean to the west, Mexico to the south, expensive mountainous terrain to develop to the east, and a huge military base to the north. LA has similar problems, but they've already expanded out, built out all of the flat land, et cetera. So in order to continue meeting the housing needs, these cities and states needed to come up with a solution to increase the housing supply. So they basically kind of redefined the zoning laws. And they did that with accessory dwelling units. So since there's no really land to develop, they said, okay, we'll let you take single family homes, even multifamily homes, and we'll let you build additional units on those lots. They put this in the municipal code and call it accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. But really, ADUs are just the same thing as any other apartment unit. So if you take a single family home and add a unit to it via accessory dwelling unit, then you essentially have a duplex. I mean, these units are the same size. They have all of the same features of any other apartment unit. So it basically is simply a way to add apartment units to an existing property. That's really it. When you boil it down. So what this allows people to do, and most cities will have regulations where they'll let you add, 1 to 2 accessory dwelling units. And sometimes even a junior accessory dwelling unit or junior ADU, which can be like these little mini studios. So they'll kind of let you add on just one more extra. But, we'll get into more of the minutia with San Diego being different and how some of these laws can change. But that's really just the gist of it, is adding apartment units to an existing property where otherwise you would not have been able to. And they did this too, because like if you look at a zoning map in a city, it's huge swaths of it are single family home zoning only, which means you can only build a single family house there. And since urban sprawl has expanded out, like the whole city is single family zoning. So the only way that these cities can add housing is by doing these ADUs.
Love it. All right. That's a really good introduction. And I'm just going to add some like color commentary. I think it's something you've done, Shawn. I've noticed from your study of the real estate market is studying zoning. And I've done the same thing. One of the biggest aha moments in my market when I was a young investor was a mentor, I think, or a class I took recommended like printing out the zoning map and like putting it on the wall. And if it was a black and white map, then like coloring in the different zoning. So like I would take like literally like color pencils or crayons.
Oh, awesome.
And so I would get like the RM4 zoning, which is the multifamily most dense, and then I'd get the RM3 and RM2. And I would just like a coloring book, like coloring the lines in here. But as I was doing that, it sort of forced me to get the kind of geographic understanding of, oh, okay, interesting. RM4 is mainly in this area and it's very limited. Like there's not much of it here. RM1, R20 and R12, which is our kind of 20,000 and 12,000 square foot single family zoning. It's like half the city. And so you start getting, I highly recommend people do that just to get kind of higher level understanding of zoning, because this is like the framework that defines everything else we do as real estate investors. And yet, like at least mom and pop investors don't really study zoning that much. They don't look at those maps. Whereas I know more on the commercial side, it's very common and important to do that. And I don't know if you have any tips on understanding. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I want to get into the zoning regulations themselves, but maybe just about the idea of studying your market a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that there's a bunch of benefits to doing this. For one, this cannot define your strategy or open up new strategies. So like as a good example, many cities that have banned Airbnb, since we brought that up, or not banned it, but implemented strict regulations. A lot of these cities, if the property is actually zoned on a commercially zoned lot, which you'll find single families actually own an Airbnb in Louisville, Kentucky, it's on a commercially zoned lot. And if it is, then it can be operated as a bed and breakfast. And a lot of these cities will let you still operate as an Airbnb. So if that's a strategy you want to use, you need to know the zoning. You need to look that up, because if a property goes on the market and you see that, then that could trigger, okay, this is an investment opportunity for me. And then obviously with A.D.Us, we're going to talk about it, but that takes into the zoning comes into the calculus, because that can tell you how many A.D.Us you can build. So certain zonings are going to let you put numerous more units on the property. So zoning is just critical. I mean, I'm going to give a lot more examples here soon, but by that, it really gives you the full picture. At the end of the day, what separates really, really great investors that can like squeeze out every bit of a return from a property are the investors that know the full wealth of information of that property, where it's located, the zoning, everything in between, so that they can maximize the profits and maximize the value add.
Agree, 100%. So the core opportunity here, I want everybody to get, I'm just repeat what you've already said, is that understanding A.D.Us is really understanding how to add density to a property. And it's an interesting angle you can think about it like a duplex. If you could add 2 A.D.Us, you can think about it like a triplex. And it's a way that the local governments and state governments are implementing this to use single family neighborhoods and keeping kind of the character of the neighborhood while also adding some gentle density to the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So right.
And I wanted to add a couple things right there before we moved on, because I forgot to mention some stuff. Some additional benefits of these A.D.Us are that you're essentially developing new housing, and you get to skirt around a lot of the rules and regulations and fees that traditional development has to pay. So, there's things like development impact fees and school fees and all these things for each unit you add. You don't have to do that with A.D.Us. And in addition to that, your permitting goes through a lot faster. So there's like a ton of benefits to it.
Love it. So cool. All right. So I wanted people to get, hey, this is an opportunity. You should learn about it. Let's use that to jump off. And I want to sort of do a zoning 101 class, if you may, like just to understand, because people who are listening to this, they're going to be in different cities, different counties. It's always that's the interesting thing. And that's kind of the competitive advantage, that every city is going to be a little bit different. So like Shawn's in San Diego, he's in Louisville, I'm in Clemson, South Carolina. You got to study it. But let's talk about just some of the vocabulary, maybe to understand. And I'll go through a couple layers. So maybe just number one, zoning 101. Like what is zoning, and what are the kind of basic classifications? I mentioned a little bit, but maybe you could explain a little bit more about that.
Right. So you can usually find this. I mean, you could Google zoning and then your city, San Diego. You could Google ZAPP, San Diego, ZAPP, San Diego. And what these are going to show you, you're going to see, a lot of colors on the screen, and then letters and numbers. And pretty much every city is going to have RS zoning, which stands for residential single family. It'll sometimes have an RS with a number tacked onto it, which generally is just going to be, how big of a home you could put on there essentially, because it'll change the floor area ratio. And then you're going to see RM zoning, which stands for residential multifamily. And oftentimes, or in all cases, those are also going to have some numbers at the end of them. You might see RM11, you might see RM32, and the numbers go up. Those numbers are just density. The bigger the number, the more units you can fit on that lot. Simple as that. And identifying that is critical for you to determine how many units you could put on or how big of a house you could put on the lot. Then you can also obviously get into commercial zoning, which will usually have a C as the first letter. And like I said before, that could be beneficial for you because oftentimes those will not only let you add more units, you can add retail on the first floor. Sometimes you might even be required to, or you can operate a bed and breakfast. Some cities, you can build more units and make all of them Airbnbs and have a little mini hotel. So knowing your zoning and how your city regulates that zoning, because they are all different, is critical as a real estate investor.
Got it. So first and foremost, you need to understand what those classifications are. Then, so let's use ADUs as a lens, because there's so many different uses you can look into. But to use ADU, let's say you want to build, you have a single family house, real simple example, and you think there's a good opportunity you already own the house and you want to, maybe it's your residence, maybe it's a rental property, you want to add an ADU in the backyard. You think this is a cool idea, you want to convert a garage, something like that. Let's start there. And if you were to go to your local area, what are some of the specific kind of stumbling blocks or regulations, things that you would look at, Shawn, when you're looking in the zoning at your house? Let's just take that particular house. Like what kind of things would you look at inside your zoning to see if it's even possible that you could do an ADU at your house?
Great question. So the first thing I'm looking at is the base zoning. So like we described earlier, is it zone RS or RM? Now, let's say you find a property on the MLS that you want to make a rental property or you already own it. Now, let's assume it's a single family home. A single family home could lie, obviously, in a residential RS zone, or it could even be in an RM zoned lot. They just built a single family there. Case in point, I have a project that's about a half a mile from the beach. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, but it was on RM11 zoning. Now, when you're looking at those zonings, the reason why this is important is because there is a number on there called, usually when you click on the zoning, it'll give you an FAR. That stands for floor area ratio. This is the important number that you need to look at. Now, I'm going to back up for just a second. Usually with residential single family, you can only add 1 to 2 ADUs. With multifamily, if it's a multifamily zone lot, here in San Diego, we'll get into this a little bit more, you can add unlimited ADUs up to the floor area ratio. Now, either way, if it's a single family zone lot or if it's a multifamily zone lot, you need to find on the zoning what the floor area ratio is, the FAR. It's usually a number that's like 0.75 to 1.0 to sometimes it could go up to 1.5, 2, 3, whatever have you. Typically, the bigger the number after that base zoning, so the bigger number after RS or bigger number after RM, typically is going to have a larger FAR. So you take that floor area ratio, you multiply it by the square footage of the lot that the property is on, and that is the maximum amount of livable square footage you can have on the lot. Okay, so if you have a single family zone lot, the reason why that number is there is because it's restricting how big of a house you can build. All right, you can't buy a single family home lot and build a 10,000 square foot mega mansion on a lot of these lots. They restrict that with the FAR. Now, the way this applies to ADUs is you take that number that you just calculated. So if you have a 7,000 square foot lot, the base zoning has a floor area ratio of 1.0. That means you can have 7,000 square foot of livable square footage. Now, if the house that's sitting on it is 2,000 square feet, you can add another 5,000 square feet with ADUs or just building a bigger house. So that's where that kicks in. That gives you a number. So if you have 5,000 square feet of remaining livable square footage you could build, using my example, the house is 2,000 square feet. I could build 5,000 now. So then you can divide that out by whatever unit mix you want. If you want them all to be 1,000 square feet, boom, you got 5 ADUs. That's the simple calculation on why zoning is important and how you're going to apply it to ADUs.
Yeah, such good detail there. And I'm just going to like circle around and add a little commentary too, is that the density I mentioned was the biggest opportunity here. If you have a lot that has a single family house and you can add more density to it, think about like when you build 10 A.D.U units, each of those might rent for $1,500 or $2,000 or something. So you're essentially creating an income stream, which if you're in the commercial world, you can turn that into a value and more equity. So this is like flipping a house or adding value. You're by doing something, by understanding like the hidden like value in the you called it, and you wrote a really cool book, which I'll link to as well, about the Southern California market. And basically you're panning for gold. Like you're looking for lots that have these little gold opportunities, and the gold's not literally buried in the backyard. It's like the zoning allows this extra density. So that 5,000 square foot of extra density is the potential value that hasn't been mined yet. And by you understanding that, that's the cool thing. Like that's just what you're basically unlocking value that either the existing owner hasn't chosen to use or the existing owner might not know about it. This is where like knowing a piece of information about a particular market and a particular zoning can literally unlock like millions of dollars. Like that blows my mind. I just want to make sure people like get that part of it.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I love that you plugged the book and use my analogies. I appreciate that. And I call it the New California Gold Rush because this is a new strategy. The bonus A.D.U program that we're going to talk about in San Diego is only 2 years old. And most people have heard of A.D.Us over the years, but not a lot of people are using this strategy. And like I said in the book, it's like a prospector panning for gold. Like you have to be searching, doing these things that other people don't want to do, looking at the base zoning, running these calculations, coming up with how you're going to add all that value and the money. But you're looking deeper on each property, just like a prospector, to find those golden nuggets out there that meet all the criteria so you can add the most value. And, like you said, as far as like the value potential, just to give a really basic like number to really illustrate it, here in San Diego, it costs about $150,000, $200,000 if you're doing high-end stuff to build nice A.D.Us, anywhere from 1 to 2 bedroom size. Those are trading in San Diego for north of $400,000 per unit whenever you're selling a commercial size multifamily. So the potential is clear. I mean, when you could sell it for multiple times more than what you built it for, is clear. And to add one more thing, if you're going to buy a value add multifamily in a place like California, you're going to be buying typically an old asset that was built in the 50s, 60s, or 70s. You're paying over $400,000 per door, and you're inheriting tenants that are really difficult to get out if you want to do a value add plan. So those are more reasons why I love this strategy.
Yep. Got it. All right, cool. So we've talked about the floor area ratio. And the only thing I'll add, I want to get your feedback on some other criteria like parking and some other things that might be restrictions. But going to the local level, like in my town in Clemson, for example, we have a little bit different, regulation, at least in the single family zoning, which I know a little bit better. Like they just basically say you can do an A.D.U if you can build it and it's max 700 square feet. Like they just name the square foot up to 700 square feet. So it just depends on, I know the zoning, the regulations, but the RM4, RM3, RM2, all of those are much more flexible. And so it gets really interesting. So like that's the thing, like even in a town that I've been in for 20 years, there's little nuances that I don't understand well enough that I'm learning here, and I'm going to be studying in my own market because I think there's plenty of gold hidden in some of these little areas that I'm going to go look out for, both on my current properties, also on other ones. So I want to encourage people, as you're listening to this, you're going to hear, I want Shawn to share specific things about his markets because that's where a lot of the learning happens. But then you're going to need to take that and say, all right, what's the equivalent of the floor area ratio, or what's the equivalent of the regulation in my market, and that's where the gold is. You figuring out that thing. And so just with that said, the floor area ratio is one thing you mentioned. Are there other things that you need to look for when you're looking at that one lot and saying, all right, how much opportunity is here? Are there other things that could take away opportunity, other things that could add opportunity that you would look at within the zoning for that lot?
Absolutely. So I'm going to be talking about stuff that's specific to San Diego, but just that way everyone has an idea of, how these markets can differ and whatnot. But here in San Diego, other things I look for, and you can get this on the zoning, like I said, ZAPP San Diego, and your city probably has something similar. But here in San Diego, if it's located in a transit priority area, which is basically within a half a mile or a mile of major public transportation, so buses, the trolley, things like that, then there is no parking requirement. And in addition to that, that's what the property has to be in a TPA, transit priority area, and in order to use the city's bonus ADU program. So I always ensure that if I'm going to do a deal that's, using bonus ADUs, it's in a TPA. I want resident or RM zoning, residential multifamily, so that I can maximize my density. A couple other things that are in my criteria is the property needs to have alley access. The reason why is because if I'm building a bunch of units in the back, it's much cheaper and easier for the contractors to get back there and build. So if they're having to use cranes and stuff like that to get everything back there, it's more expensive, obviously. And in addition to that, it reduces your setbacks. So a setback is just simply, how close to the edge of your property you can build. So if they reduce the setback because I've got an alley, then I have a larger footprint I can build on. So it's easier to build the property, easier to add more units. And then I also typically look for properties that, this isn't necessarily a zoning specific, but I personally like to look for good neighborhoods that have good schools, low crime, and high median household income. For the simple fact that it costs me basically the exact same to build it in a good neighborhood as it does to build it in a bad neighborhood. So if I can get more rent over here in a good neighborhood, then obviously I'm going to want to build in those neighborhoods. And if you're thinking about doing this in California, something that you have to keep in mind, this is important, is that you got to look at the base zoning. And if it's in the California Coastal Commission coastal overlay zone, that's a big deal. And you have to make sure it's what's in the non-appealable zone. Basically, if you don't know, California's got this California Coastal Commission that controls everything along the coastline, basically west of the 5 freeway, and you don't want to deal with them. So if you get it in the non-appealable zone, I'll keep it simple. You can still build these things without a lot of headache and without your having to go in front of a hearing with all of your neighbors giving their opinion. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, I've heard stories of friends in California. That's like, it could be decades, it could be forever that
exactly.
You might never build on your lot. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, there's a panel of 12 people that have absolute authority on that, and you have to go make your case to those people. And long story short, it ain't going to happen. So just don't try.
So that's so helpful because essentially you've studied your market, you've looked at your local zoning, you looked at your local bonus density law and said, all right, this zoning classification, this alleyway, you understand setbacks the more setbacks you have, the less density you have, the more parking you have to build, the less density you have. And so really you've just kind of drawn a formula there for optimizing the most amount of units you can put on a lot. And could you, in your book, I read a couple of examples of the types of numbers we're talking about here, but can you, most people are thinking A.D.U. one property, but in your case with this bonus, like how many can you get on a property? Like what have you seen on some of the really good deals?
So you can add, depending on the size of the lot, obviously is going to let you add more units. So if you're finding big lots that are in RM zoned, that are zoned for multifamily, for example, it's not uncommon for people to put 20 units, 30 units that are all ADUs. Now, as an additional benefit here, let's say you did buy that single family home and you added 5, 6, 7, 10 units. That property is now considered a commercial multifamily property, which means it's valued like one, valued based off of the net operating income. And I won't get into all the minutia on that because it's complex, but your value is just increased exponentially by doing so. And, that's one of the reasons why whenever I'm looking for properties, I typically want to see a 7,000 square foot lot or greater, because that gives me the best chance to add, 5 units or more so that I'm in that commercial multifamily. But when we're talking numbers here, like as an example of a project that I'm working on that's relatively close to the beach, that property all in, we're just a little over $3 million. And that's for the purchasing the property. That's for soft costs and permitting and design. And then the conservative estimate for construction costs. When this property is fully leased up and we put it on the market, conservatively, this property is going to be worth north of $5 million, which we're talking a 20% average annual return plus that you can achieve by doing something like that. And that's unheard of for me in San Diego. I've lived here for 12 years. I've studied the market, and up until this plan, I had zero interest in investing in San Diego. because of how expensive it is, how hard it is for me to even get a tenant out to even do a value add plan. And then this came along. So the potential to add all of these units, the potential to build them for way cheaper than I would have to purchase them for, and then I can go sell it for that higher price. The numbers are just, they're numbers that I've never seen in San Diego. And I'm sure these kind of numbers are going to be very similar in other markets. So, you don't have to add that many units for it to be that juicy. The reason why I'm adding so many units is because I'm raising money from investors and splitting profits with them. You can add 1, 2, 3 units to a property, completely cover your mortgage, and live rent-free in a place like San Diego and do it for way cheaper than if you were to go and buy a duplex or a fourplex yourself.
Love it. Love the big picture potential. And also kind of going back to our small and mighty investor, let's go to that like 1 or 2 A.D.U example, and let's talk about the money, because I think you've done a good job of laying out the potential here, the value potential. Both if you spend $150,000, $200,000 to build it, and you're adding $300,000 or $400,000 in value, you built some equity. If you want to do income, and if you spend $150,000, $200,000 on the A.D.U and it produces $2,000 to $4,000 in income, you can now just cash flow it and just keep it. That makes sense too. So let's talk about like how you might creatively raise the money. Let's just put our kind of thinking caps on. If you're somebody who has a rental property, it's already in a multifamily zone, it's a duplex or something, or a single family, and now you're going to try to say, all right, I want to do this. I want to spend $200,000 to $400,000. How might somebody think about raising that money?
So a couple of things. The good news is if you are a small and mighty investor and you want to add a couple of ADUs to your property, it's actually easier if you're keeping it to just adding 1 or 2 or 3 units, because nowadays there's a lot of financing options. So if you go find an A.D.U company in your city, like if you're in California, there's a bunch of them, A.D.U Geeks, Multitasker, to name a few. They have financing options that are actually awesome. So oftentimes they'll look at what the ARV, the after repair value, or the value of the property after those units are built, and they'll offer you really high leverage, like sometimes up to 80% of the after repair value to build those units. But a lot of companies, like for example, I'll even name one, Multitasker as an example, they have lenders that will lend 100% of the cost. Sometimes there's even products where they will lend $100,000 for each person that's signed onto the loan, and you don't make any payments for the first year of that loan. So there's a lot of different options in creative financing that you can do to build just 1 or 2 of these A.D.U units. I would say it's probably one of the easiest ways to get lending to add value. And then once you've done this, it's pretty straightforward to do a refinance or a cash out refinance to, have all of that debt under one note. So I would say if you're a newbie investor, or maybe, just a smaller investor that just wants to add a couple of units, reach out to A.D.U companies in your market, and more than likely they're going to have some really awesome loan products for you. So I would recommend doing that. And if you are going to do this, make sure you're looking at the regulations in your city as well, because a lot of cities won't let you, like, for example, Airbnb your A.D.U. You don't want to get yourself in trouble and do that. Like San Diego does not let you Airbnb an A.D.U, but they will let you do a midterm rental. So you can do things like, rent out to a midterm rental is just, renting out to like travel nurses, things like that. There's a lot of options you can do with your A.D.Us.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the rental regulations, because we talked, about the zoning, we talked about, the density, and those are the first steps, right? But I know in my town, for example, we have a rental licensing law, and I know a lot of places even have rent control laws as well. But our rental licensing law has essentially an occupancy limit. And so, because we're in a college town, and probably 20 years ago, people would just put 5 or 6 students in a house, and it was just it felt like Animal House, and all the neighbors are just getting mad about it. And so, and if you're in single family zoning, you have occupancy rules that say, for example, 2 not unrelated occupants per house, and you have to get a rental license. And so they check that. And in fact, I just did my rental inspections for a couple of my properties this morning. And so that's the kind of thing you got to understand. Not only your zoning, but then your rental regulations regulations as well. And it could be, so you just can't go do an Airbnb and say, oh, the numbers are going to work if they don't allow it. But then again, they might have exceptions. So the money's made in the exceptions. Like you said, if you live in the house and you wanted to rent an Airbnb in your backyard, that might be permitted. And it probably is in San Diego. I think it is in our area too. So you just got to know that that's where you can't give a blanket statement, but at the same time, there's tons and tons of exceptions and there's tons of ways to make money if you really study it.
Yeah, exactly. And combining multiple strategies. Like, I love what you just mentioned. You can, like, we've talked about the house hack. Let's say you live in this property, you add a couple of units, okay? And then let's say you Airbnb one or two of these units. That's 3 strategies. That's development / value add because you just added units, your house hacking because you're living in one of the units, and then you're Airbnb one of the units to maximize your income. So getting creative like this, understanding the regulations, getting creative and combining strategies in today's day and age, that's how you're going to accelerate your wealth building.
Perfect. All right. So we talked about the opportunity, the zoning. We talked about some of the particulars locally. We've done a little bit of analysis, just understanding how you would run the numbers on this. I wanted the final piece of the puzzle that I think could be a stumbling block for me if I were doing it as well is the construction, project management side of things. And since you've kind of got into this business and done that, I wonder if you have any tips on or any maybe just mistakes that people could make when you're actually implementing and building an A.D.U as well.
That's a really great question. When it comes to doing the construction of these things, I'm always going to recommend that you go with like an A.D.U company that can kind of oversee all of that, because usually they have all of this stuff in-house where they are going to be submitting the permits on your behalf. They've got the engineers in-house. They're going to do your design. It's really going to make it a lot easier for you to move forward. And it's also going to be the cheapest way in most cases. But one thing that I think everybody listening to this needs to keep in mind is to always make sure you're putting 20% contingency capital onto anything these contractors tell you. And I would also make sure you're getting multiple bids in all cases. So if you're working with a company in San Diego and they give you a bid for everything, you need to make sure you're getting minimum 3 bids, because that's going to make it a lot easier for you to compare pricing, but also make sure that they're including work and materials separately so that you can then compare apples to apples. So if one person is way lower than the other companies, that could indicate to you that maybe they're overpromising. Or keep in mind as well that cheaper doesn't always mean better. So the first thing I would say is, whenever you're going to do this, that's the riskiest part of this business plan, is the construction. So you want to make sure that, like I said, you got 20% contingency capital set aside, because there could be change orders. Things could go wrong. They could start digging and run into, there's things to watch out for. They could start digging dirt and then they find a problem and it's going to cost more money. So always make sure that you're flush with cash, because the construction part can be risky. And if you can get through that phase, you're off to the races, but you want to make sure you're well prepared for that phase. And I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, I've seen both new construction houses, but also these kind of remodeling projects where the investor runs out of money, and it's the worst place to be in, because you don't have a finished product. Basically, they don't trust any of the work you've done up to that point. If they have to finish it, right, they have to basically like scrap a lot of the work you've already done. So you just it's a value add that hasn't finished is just a horrible place to be. And having gas in the tank, having money in the bank is really the way you finish that. Because even if you're over budget, even if you make I've lost money on deals where at least I was able to finish the deal and flip it. But I had to be able to finish it to get the money back out, even to lose money. Like otherwise, I would have lost everything. So it's
absolutely. I've
such
been
a key point.
I ran out of money on my very first real estate investment. Now I was ultimately able to secure money from a private investor to finish the business plan, and I did turn a profit. But I've made that mistake before, you guys. So when it comes to this whole contractor phase, the contractor is your most important business partner. Essentially, this is the most important piece. So if you don't have experience with projects like this or renovating units and kind of have an idea of what contracts should look like, it could always be a good idea to partner with somebody. I've done that myself. Here in San Diego, I brought in a general partner who's done over $100 million in commercial construction and done a bunch of these projects himself, simply because I've done value add, but I've never done construction at this scale. And I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So even I bring in partners to try and help mitigate that risk. But just keep in mind that you need to research as much as you can about vetting contractors, and ensure that that puzzle piece of the puzzle is mitigated as much as possible.
Love it. All right. Good advice. And as someone who's been in remodels, and I give myself like a B minus contract, remodeler. I like to hire. I like to hire good contractors. I like to bring partners on. Same thing. And particularly when you get into something new, like there's just you don't know what you don't know. Like you don't know that there's going to be steps that you're gonna add to your checklist of mistakes you make. But on the first one or two, like you don't want to make that mistake and have it cost you even more. So I think that's excellent advice. All right, so I want to circle back around. Like the opportunity here is like people might have an existing property that they're looking at that they can add more value to. They might be stuck in their market. They're like, there's no deals here. What do I do? Like you in San Diego, like you couldn't find deals until you unlock this. So is there anything else we haven't covered that you think might be helpful for people to unlock this strategy of using A.D.Us on existing properties, on new properties? Like what else should we talk about that we haven't covered?
I would say, you know, if I was to put like a final put the cherry on top of this business model, I would say, if you want to do this the cheapest way, if you're targeting properties that have a 1 or 2 car garage, that's always going to be the cheapest way. So if you have a property with an existing 2 car garage, you can get that done for much less than $100,000 to convert that, if it's a simple plan. So existing structures are always easier. So you can also have, like, let's say a spare room or section of your house. So let me give an example, actually. The project I've already mentioned a couple of times, it's not that far from the beach in San Diego. That property has a 2-car garage and it has an extra room, like an extra living room above the garage. Both of those are being converted to 1-bedroom apartment units. And those conversions, if you're converting an existing structure or part of a house, you're going to be able to get the permitting done much faster. The design's going to be cheaper and the construction is going to be cheaper because all of the base bones are already there. So if you have an existing property that you're thinking about doing this, start there first because that's going to be the cheapest and give you your biggest bang for your buck. Go ahead and get those done, and then that can change your life and the trajectory of that property a lot easier. And then from there, you can build out. But remember, building a new structure is always going to be more expensive. So focus on the stuff that's already there.
Yeah, so attached A.D.Us, I know that's another term I've heard out there. Attached A.D.Us versus detached A.D.Us. So the attached ones, the garage, or you look at a big master bedroom suite and kind of carving that off and putting an insulated wall between them. Those are the kind of, if you can find those kind of opportunities, you're using that roof, the foundation, the utilities that you already have instead of having to do all of that from scratch.
Exactly.
Love it. Shawn, this has been really helpful. I know this is in some ways the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more, but I think this is a really cool, concise way to explain an opportunity that has been on my radar for a while. I haven't done a lot of it myself, but I just, in seeing that people like you, I saw your website and what you're doing just really got me excited. And I hope people will run with this and do it and find their local. I'd love to hear from people. Like leave me a comment on YouTube or send me an email at chad@coachcarson.com about what you're up to if you're doing some of this A.D.U stuff. And Shawn, I know people are going to want to hang out with you and connect with you. You have a podcast, you have other things going on. So let people know where they can connect with you. And I'll put links to all this in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much, Carson. So the number one way I would like you guys to follow along is to follow me on Instagram. I put a lot of effort into putting stuff on there every single day and teaching you what I'm doing. That's simple. It's at Shawn_DeMartel, which we'll be able to put in the show notes. You can go to my website, investorshawn.com. That's investor, SHAWN.com. And you scroll to the bottom and you could download my ebook on this A.D.U strategy that I'm using in San Diego. In that ebook, I give you the secret sauce. I show you exactly where to get this information. I show you how to calculate everything. It's a short ebook you can digest in less than an hour. So that's a great resource if you want to get more in depth on this strategy. But you're going to be able to get a hold of me any way you want by going to one of those resources.
Thank you. And I read through it like in one evening, so I agree. And it's cool to when people share like this. Like what's cool about your book, Shawn, is like this is very specific on San Diego. It was very helpful for me though too, being in a totally different market. But if you happen to be in a California market where you have some similar regulations, like that's what you want. Somebody's done a bunch of research and said, all right, here's this regulation, here's this zoning, go to this
and
link.
It's free, by the way.
Yeah, it's a free book. So like this is a really, if you're in his market in particular, but if you're really in any market where you want to study how an investor has actually gone through the process of understanding their local zoning laws, that's what I recommend for the book, and think it's a really good resource. So thank you for putting that out there, Shawn.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good day. Look forward to connecting soon, and appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much, Chad. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for watching this interview with Shawn D. Martell, all about finding hidden cash flow in A.D.Us. Please join me again next week. I'm going to have an episode talking about the current economy, what to expect in the real estate market, how to adapt to whatever changes we see in this time of the year. And as always, it's going to be focused on the small and mighty real estate investor to help you buy your next rental property, to improve your portfolio, and to eventually have financial freedom so you can get out of the financial grind. See you next time. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I've not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.